Good evening, everyone. This is Donald again. Welcome to another edition of Fond Memories. Hope everyone's week is going well. Well, today's edition of Fond Memories may be a little bit somber. What we're going to talk about today is some memories of my cousin Stanley. Now, people might be wondering, why am I talking about a specific person today? Well, unfortunately, my cousin Stanley passed away unexpectedly several weeks ago at the age of 59. He had gone hiking at a national park. I believe he finished the hike, but then experienced some health condition and unfortunately passed away almost immediately at the national park. So the funeral just occurred this past Saturday out here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and with the permission of Stanley's other family, mainly his younger sister and younger brother, I'm going to share a few memories of my interactions with Stanley through the years. First of all, just to be clear, Stanley being quite a few years older than me, I didn't interact with him a ton, and nor was I particularly close to him. I was actually more closer to his younger brother because we were at the same age and went to the same school for several years. And me and his younger brother would talk a little bit more, have more conversations from, our time in school to when we got older, and even till recent years in adulthood and stuff like that. Stanley himself, as even indicated by his friends at the funeral, who, especially his best friend who was doing the eulogy, Stanley was a very independent person, liked to go out and do stuff, and obviously our interests between what he liked and what I did were a little bit different. But I will share a few things though that we had some experiences with. The first experience was back in the day back in the 1980s or so, when the early computers came out. There were a lot of different computers: Commodore 64, the Atari 400 or 800 series, and whatnot, and especially in the early to mid 80s. But for me personally, my computer of choice that my dad had picked up was the Apple IIe. And interestingly enough, Stanley, I don't know if his family purchased it or Stanley purchased it himself, also had an Apple IIe. So I do remember, since I went to school with his brother for several years, sometimes I would go over to their house because it was close by to our school, and hang out and wait for a few hours until my mom could come pick me up so we can go home. And there was their Apple IIe there, and Stanley was doing whatever he was doing, and sometimes we would talk about what he was doing. But really the main thing I remember, because I like video games, arcade games back in the day, was we would just play games on the Apple II or the Apple IIe. Now, keeping in mind though, for people who don't know the Apple IIe, the Apple IIe was not like your typical video game system back in the day where they had multiple joysticks or joystick ports. The Apple IIe only had really one port, and a lot of the games were at least not really meant to be two-player. I mean, you could, but not at the same time, right? You could play with one controller, but my recollections of those days were not really playing games necessarily with Stanley or even against Stanley, and even his brother wasn't really necessarily into games as much as I was. My experience was, asking Stanley, hey, if you don't mind, can I just mess around with your computer and play whatever games were around? And because he had an Apple IIe, and so did I even ended up borrowing quite a few games from him so I could play it myself, so I didn't always have to buy those games. So those are some interesting times, man, because Stanley, I thought I had a big collection of games. I think he had a lot. In fact, now that I think about it, I don't know, the Apple IIe's been gone for many, many years, but I wonder if Stanley still had his old computer around, or programs. Not that I want to go get them. They're super ancient, and you can actually play a lot of Apple II games on a emulator these days, so you don't necessarily need the actual system. But hey, it's a good piece of history if it's still around, though. Maybe I'll ask brother and see if anything's still around. So really that was the first thing, was, you know, thinking about Apple IIe and the computer and stuff. The second memory for Stanley was more about his career. And I don't remember if I talked to him about this or maybe his brother brought it up. Can't remember. But I do recall Stanley was as it turns out, I thought he was a business information systems major like I was at San Francisco State University, but at the funeral, I think he actually did, it was stated he did computer science. I'm not entirely sure either way, but I do seem to recall at one point, I seem to recall Stanley was a developer programmer in the language of COBOL, spelled C-O-B-O-L. For those who aren't familiar with COBOL, I'm not surprised. COBOL's pretty old and pretty ancient, and for many, many years, even when I was at San Francisco State, it was slowly getting phased out. Now, you would be surprised, though, if you recall, if you read the news for a while, there were some companies, mainly a lot of major banks, that still use COBOL. And actually, for a while, there was some push to get COBOL developers, because even though the banks, the language itself is outdated, but it still works and functions, and they needed people to update the programs that were in use at the time. So the whole funny thing about looping it back to Stanley and me was Stanley was, I believe, used COBOL, but the interesting thing is I majored in information systems at San Francisco State, and I actually had a choice between C++ and COBOL, and because C++ was much more popular and difficult to get during my times at school, I ended up taking COBOL just so I could get it done and move on with the rest of my classes. But looping it back to Stanley, though, the reason I'm thinking about this was he was one of the first guys in, I guess you can call it IT or programmer. I don't remember anyone else back in those days that was a programmer before I got to college. But then I remember he was in COBOL, and then suddenly he wasn't. He ended up working at the San Francisco Public Library, and I'm not entirely sure why or what happened. I could speculate on a few things, right? Maybe COBOL wasn't his thing. Maybe he just didn't like it. Being a programmer developer is not an easy gig. Or the other thing was doing COBOL was slowly dying. Maybe whatever job he was at or company was at didn't need COBOL developers anymore, and he let go, he quit, whatever the case may be. But the interesting thing overall was he actually never went back to the IT industry. He ended up working at the San Francisco Public Library for a good amount for pretty much the rest of his life until he passed away. So, and I think I talked to him about it maybe once or twice, but really he didn't say much about it, and that was perfectly fine. But it's just interesting that Stanley was one of those early IT computer science programmer type of people. So, you know, I never really thought about it until his passing that, yeah, that was a pretty unique thing back in those early days, right? And maybe if Stanley had gone to school a little bit around my time, or maybe even a little bit later, meaning with the advent of the internet out there and all the demand for programmers these days, whether you're a website designer or doing back-end stuff or whatever, maybe he'd still be in the industry. But regardless, he made his choice, and he was actually very happy, from what I heard at the funeral, working at the library and helping people, you know, with books and whatnot. Lastly, just to finish up, something interesting. Like I said, I didn't really know Stanley great. You know, didn't talk to him a lot. You know, I'm sad that he's gone. But looking at the program for that they had at the service or funeral. This is the front page. There's a couple of things inside, and then there's the back, which had some pictures, right? And looking at this front picture here, you see Stanley holding a camera. Now, I can't really tell what model of camera he's using, but it's interesting that I didn't realize that he was a photographer, or was into photography. For those who don't know, I'm into photography as well. I do scenic shots, sunset, that type of things. I like doing sports and action shots and night shots as well. So in a way, it's a shame I didn't get to interact with Stanley too much, especially in the more recent years, because I would have loved to talk to him about his photography and see what he was using, how he was using his cameras, what model cameras and all of that. But it's okay. Basically, like the program said, and the reason why the program had his pictures, those were the last few pictures that were taken of him literally on that last trip right before he passed away. So kind of sad in that one sense, but his memories that he took will be obviously forever preserved. And people who don't know me, I like to keep a lot of memorabilia around. And this program is actually really nice and a good reflection of Stanley's love of, obviously, of nature and photography. So I will try to keep this around as well. Any case, that pretty much does it for this edition of Fond Memories. I will share this with my cousins, and hopefully they'll appreciate it. Thinking back about what my interactions with Stanley were through the years. Unfortunately, he's gone, but rest in peace, Stanley. I did talk to some other people about what I do with these video logs, and I've primarily shared memories of, some places, a lot of like Chinatown or other places I've gone to. But someone did suggest that maybe I should do more family memories as well, like recollections of like parents or other memories of family stuff. And actually I thought that's actually a very good idea. So moving forward, I might share things about, like, especially I've been scanning a lot of old family photos to put together into a photo album of my mom, dad, and myself. So, and some of the pictures have triggered a few memories, so maybe I might do that and look back at some of those pictures as well through the years, just to have this memories recorded. Alrighty, thanks for watching. Appreciate everyone's time. Hope everyone have a great rest of their week, and I will catch you next time on the next edition of Fond Memories.